Imagine two objects placed in chaos. One breaks, one survives unchanged, and one, unexpectedly, gets stronger. Nassim Taleb calls this third category antifragile. In a world obsessed with prediction, control, and stability, Antifragile makes a radical claim. Disorder is not the enemy. It is fuel. This book is not about avoiding uncertainty, but learning how to benefit from it. Taleb opens with a powerful metaphor. Wind extinguishes a candle but energizes a fire. Randomness, uncertainty, stress, and volatility work the same way. Some things are harmed by disorder, some resist it, and some grow because of it. Taleb's mission is not merely survival and uncertainty, but dominance, learning how to harness what we cannot predict. Antifragility explains why evolution, culture, ideas, cities, and even human bodies improve through stressors. The antifragile loves errors and volatility because they provide information. This insight leads to a new way of decision-making, one that does not rely on forecasting the future, but on reducing fragility in the present. Book 1, The Antifragile, an Introduction. Chapter 1, Between Damocles and Hydra. Taleb begins by identifying a fundamental blind spot in human thinking. We lack a word for the true opposite of fragile. When something is fragile, it is harmed by shocks, volatility, and disorder. Most people assume that the opposite of fragile must be robust or resilient. But robustness only means resistance to damage. It does not mean improvement. A robust object survives stress unchanged. Antifragility, however, goes further. It describes systems that actively benefit from stress, randomness, and harm. Taleb illustrates this using mythology. Damocles, sitting under a sword held by a single hair, represents fragility, one shock away from ruin. The phoenix, reborn after destruction, represents resilience. It recovers but returns to its original state. Hydra, the mythical creature that grows two heads when one is cut off, represents antifragility. It becomes stronger when attacked. This distinction is crucial because most natural systems, from evolution to culture to ideas, behave like Hydra, not Damocles. The chapter argues that antifragility is not a rare phenomenon, but a dominant force in life. The reason we fail to recognize it is linguistic and conceptual. Half of what matters in life operates in this unnamed zone. By failing to distinguish between fragility, robustness, and antifragility, modern systems are designed in ways that suppress growth and unintentionally amplify risk. Chapter 2, Overcompensation and Overreaction. In this chapter, Taleb explores how systems often respond to stress not with balance, but with excess, and how this excess can be beneficial. Biological systems overreact to threats because overreaction increases survival odds. Muscles grow stronger when stressed beyond comfort. Immune systems improve after exposure. Even emotional systems, such as obsessive love, display antifragility by intensifying under pressure. Taleb introduces redundancy as a core feature of antifragility. What appears inefficient, extra organs, spare capacity, backup systems, is often what allows survival under uncertainty. Modern optimization removes redundancy in the name of efficiency, but this creates fragility. Systems optimized for normal conditions collapse when conditions change. He also explains the anti-fragility of information. Attempts to suppress or ban information often increase its spread. Controversy, criticism, and attacks act as stressors that amplify visibility. Overreaction is therefore not always a flaw. In many domains, it is a hidden source of strength. Chapter 3, The Cat and the Washing Machine. Taleb draws a sharp distinction between organic systems and mechanical ones. A cat learns from disorder, adapts to its environment, and becomes stronger through experience. A washing machine, in contrast, breaks when mistreated. The problem arises when modern society treats complex, organic systems, such as economies, education, and politics, as if they were machines. This chapter criticizes the obsession with equilibrium, stability, and control. Organic systems thrive in disequilibrium. Attempts to remove volatility from life, what Taleb calls touristification, strip systems of their ability to learn. By smoothing randomness, we prevent small errors and invite catastrophic failures. Stressors, Taleb argues, are information. Without stress, systems do not adapt. By translating messy, real-world complexity into neat models, modern thinking commits what Taleb sees as crimes against natural intelligence. Chapter 4. What kills me makes others stronger. Taleb explains that antifragility often exists at the collective level, even when individuals suffer. Evolution works because individual organisms die, allowing the species to improve. Errors, failures, and risk-taking benefit the system as a whole. Modern society tries to eliminate failure, protecting individuals and institutions from consequences. This creates moral hazard, systems that survive despite incompetence. When gains are private but losses are socialized, fragility accumulates beneath the surface. Taleb emphasizes that progress requires exposure to downside. Entrepreneurs, innovators, and risk-takers drive improvement precisely because they face real consequences. A system that shields everyone from failure eventually collapses under its own suppressed risks. Book 2, Modernity and the Denial of Antifragility. Chapter 5, The Souk and the Office Building. This chapter contrasts decentralized, bottom-up systems with centralized, top-down ones. Traditional markets, small businesses, and city-states evolve organically, absorbing shocks through diversity and noise. Large bureaucratic organizations, by contrast, depend on prediction, planning, and control. Taleb introduces mediocristan and extremistan. In mediocristan, averages dominate and extreme events are rare. In extremistan, rare events dominate outcomes. Modern economies increasingly operate in extremistan, where prediction fails and fragility grows. Attempts to stabilize such systems through regulation, forecasting, and optimization often make them more vulnerable. Small failures prevent large ones. Removing noise removes resilience. Chapter 6. Tell them I love randomness. Taleb explores the concept of annealing, borrowed from metallurgy. Systems improve when exposed to controlled stress. Overstabilization, however, makes systems brittle. This applies to politics, economics, and foreign policy. Suppressing small conflicts creates the conditions for massive ones later. Taleb challenges the idea that peace always results from intervention. Sometimes allowing small, localized stress prevents systemic collapse. The chapter criticizes intellectuals who fear randomness and try to eliminate it through policy. Randomness is not the enemy of order. It is the source of long-term stability. Chapter 7. Naive Intervention. Taleb introduces iatrogenics, harm caused by the healer. In medicine, excessive treatment often worsens outcomes. The same applies to economic and political intervention. Naive intervention assumes full knowledge of complex systems. It focuses on visible benefits while ignoring hidden side effects. Taleb argues for restraint, humility, and an understanding of limits. Non-naive intervention means acting cautiously, preferring inaction when uncertainty is high, and recognizing that doing less often produces better results than doing more. Chapter 8. Prediction as a Child of Modernity. This chapter attacks the modern obsession with prediction. Forecasting works in simple systems, but fails in complex ones dominated by rare events. Black swans cannot be reliably predicted. Taleb argues that reliance on prediction increases fragility by encouraging risk-taking based on false confidence. Instead of trying to forecast shocks, systems should be built to survive and benefit from them. The goal is not to predict the future, but to avoid being ruined by it. Book 3. A Non-Predictive View of the World. Chapter 9. Fat Tony and the Fragilistas. Fat Tony represents practical intelligence. He does not rely on models or forecasts, but senses fragility intuitively. Fragilistas, in contrast, depend on theories, spreadsheets, and assumptions that ignore hidden risks. Taleb argues that real-world experience often outperforms formal knowledge in uncertain environments. The ability to detect fragility is more valuable than predictive accuracy. Chapter 10. Seneca's Upside and Downside. Using Stoic philosophy, Taleb introduces asymmetry. Antifragile systems limit downside while preserving upside. Stoics practiced emotional antifragility by preparing for loss while remaining open to gain. By minimizing harm and embracing volatility, one can thrive without prediction. The focus shifts from maximizing returns to avoiding ruin. Chapter 11. Never marry the rock star. Taleb presents the barbell strategy. Extreme safety on one side, extreme risk-taking on the other, avoiding the fragile middle. This structure allows exposure to upside without catastrophic downside. In life, finance, and decision-making, moderation can be dangerous. Antifragility emerges from combining caution with bold experimentation. Book 4. Optionality, Technology, and the Intelligence of Antifragility. Chapter 12. Thales' Sweet Grapes. Taleb explains optionality through the story of Thales, who secured the right, but not the obligation, to use olive presses, benefiting from uncertainty without prediction. Optionality provides asymmetric payoffs. Nature, entrepreneurs, and innovators thrive by experimenting, not planning. Optionality allows success even when understanding is incomplete. By favoring options over forecasts, anti-fragile systems turn uncertainty into advantage. Chapter 13. Lecturing Birds on How to Fly. Taleb attacks what he calls the illusion of explanatory knowledge, the belief that formal theories and expert explanations are the true drivers of success and progress. He uses the metaphor of lecturing birds on how to fly to describe intellectuals who attempt to explain complex systems after the fact, confusing description with causation. Growth, innovation, and success usually emerge from trial and error, tinkering, and experimentation, not from top-down design. The chapter explains asymmetric payoffs. Progress comes from a small number of successes among many failures. Systems that allow many small experiments naturally discover what works. Attempts to impose order, optimization, and theory often destroy this process. Taleb argues that epiphenomena, things that appear important but are not causal, are frequently mistaken for the true sources of success. Chapter 14. When two things are not the same thing. This chapter introduces the green lumber fallacy. People can succeed without understanding the reasons for their success. Taleb recounts how traders made money without knowing why lumber was called green. Practical success does not require theoretical understanding. Taleb criticizes the obsession with explanations, credentials, and polished knowledge. Real-world performance often comes from heuristics, habits, and experience rather than formal reasoning. Confusing knowledge about a system with knowledge that works leads to fragile decisions. The chapter emphasizes that conflating different types of knowledge, academic, practical, experiential, creates errors in judgment. Antifragile systems privilege results over explanations. Chapter 15. History written by the losers. Taleb argues that the history of innovation and progress is systematically misrepresented. Official histories credit scientists, planners, and institutions while ignoring tinkerers, entrepreneurs, and randomness. Success stories are cleaned up after the fact to appear linear and intentional. He shows how medicine, technology, and business advance through experimentation rather than theory. Knowledge often follows practice, not the other way around. By hiding the role of luck and failure, society builds fragile myths about progress. Taleb stresses that good systems encourage frequent small failures. These failures are not mistakes to be eliminated, but sources of information. Chapter 16. A Lesson in Disorder. This chapter focuses on education and learning. Taleb criticizes rigid curricula, standardized testing, and overstructured learning environments. These systems favor order and predictability, but learning is inherently messy and nonlinear. Taleb advocates an anti-fragile education, one based on exploration, curiosity, and exposure to randomness. Real learning happens through reading widely, wandering intellectually, and making mistakes. The flaneur, who explores without a fixed goal, learns more than the rigid planner. Disorder is not an obstacle to learning. It is the mechanism through which understanding deepens. Chapter 17. Fat Tony Debates Socrates. In this chapter, Taleb stages a philosophical confrontation between practical wisdom and formal reasoning. Fat Tony represents embodied knowledge, knowing what works without being able to articulate why. Socrates represents the demand for definitions, explanations, and logic. Taleb argues that many useful practices exist precisely because they work, not because they can be explained. Tradition, rituals, and heuristics often encode hidden intelligence accumulated over time. Rejecting them because they lack theoretical justification increases fragility. The chapter reinforces the distinction between doing and explaining. Antifragile systems prioritize survival and performance over intellectual elegance. Book 5, The Nonlinear and the Nonlinear. Chapter 18, On the Difference Between a Large Stone and 1,000 Pebbles. Taleb introduces nonlinearity to explain fragility. Harm does not scale proportionally with size. A single large shock can be far more damaging than many small ones combined. Large systems accumulate hidden risks because they suppress small failures. Small systems fail frequently, but recover quickly. This is why decentralization reduces fragility. Size magnifies downside. The chapter provides a practical rule. Anything that suffers more from large shocks than it benefits from small ones is fragile. Antifragile systems are built to fail small. Chapter 19. The Philosopher's Stone and its Inverse. Taleb deepens the discussion of convexity and concavity. Convex systems benefit from variability and uncertainty, while concave systems are harmed by them. This distinction allows fragility to be detected without prediction. The Philosopher's Stone metaphor represents strategies that turn volatility into advantage. Its inverse shows how institutions convert stability into hidden ruin. Taleb explains how model error, especially underestimating rare events, destroys fragile systems. Understanding convexity allows decision-makers to avoid catastrophic losses even without knowing future events. Book 6, Via Negativa. Chapter 20, Time and Fragility. Time acts as a stress test. Fragile things break with time. Anti-fragile things improve. Taleb introduces the Lindy effect. The longer something has survived, the longer it is likely to survive. He criticizes neomania, the obsession with novelty, and explains why old ideas, practices, and technologies often outperform new ones. Subtraction, not addition, is the path to durability. The chapter argues that survival over time is stronger evidence than theoretical promise. Chapter 21. Medicine, Convexity, and Opacity. Taleb applies anti-fragility to medicine. When outcomes are uncertain and side effects are severe, aggressive intervention becomes dangerous. Many medical practices harm patients through overconfidence and excessive treatment. He argues that the sick may benefit from intervention, while the healthy are often harmed by it. The key is asymmetry. Medicine should prioritize avoiding harm over attempting optimization. Opacity in biology means humility is essential. Less intervention often leads to better outcomes. Chapter 22. To live long, but not too long. Taleb focuses on longevity through subtraction. Removing harmful habits, medications, and unnatural behaviors improves health more reliably than adding new treatments. Randomness in movement, eating, and lifestyle strengthens the body. Overcontrol weakens it. Anti-fragility favors simplicity, variation, and restraint. The chapter reinforces the principle that survival depends more on avoiding ruin than on chasing perfection. Book 7. The Ethics of Fragility and Antifragility. Chapter 23. Skin in the Game. Taleb presents skin in the game as the core ethical principle. A system is unjust and fragile when decision-makers enjoy upside without bearing downside. When risks are transferred to others, fragility spreads. True responsibility requires exposure to consequences. Ethics cannot be separated from risk. Taleb argues that societies function best when power and accountability are aligned. Skin in the game filters out bad ideas faster than regulation or credentials. Chapter 24. Fitting Ethics to a Profession. This chapter expands on moral responsibility. Professions that impose risks on others must adhere to higher ethical standards. Rules and regulations cannot replace personal accountability. Taleb criticizes bureaucratic ethics that hide behind procedures. Real ethics require personal exposure to harm. Systems that protect professionals from consequences encourage reckless behavior. Antifragile ethics demand responsibility at the individual level. Chapter 25. Conclusion. Taleb concludes by reinforcing the central message of antifragility. The goal is not to predict the future, but to survive it and benefit from its uncertainty. Systems that suppress volatility become fragile. Systems that embrace small stressors grow stronger. Antifragility is a way of living, thinking, and designing systems. By reducing fragility, respecting randomness, and aligning risk with responsibility, individuals and societies can thrive in an unpredictable world. Antifragile teaches that uncertainty is not something to fear, but something to use. Progress, resilience, and survival emerge not from control and prediction, but from exposure, experimentation, and accountability. The practical lesson is simple but demanding. Seek asymmetry, avoid ruin, allow small failures, and never separate decision-making from consequences. In doing so, disorder stops being a threat and becomes a source of strength.